Crowhill here. Today we review a beer and ask, why is everybody fascinated with Vikings? Alright, hello gentlemen, how are you?
Wait, what the heck? Longinus is here.
Fantastic. How about some beer and conversation?
Oh, that's a great idea. What are we drinking?
A beer.
Beer.
It's called Senate beer, and it's got a little history to it.
Yeah? Okay, good. Fantastic.
So what's on your mind?
Well, this is on my mind. Yeah. These fellows who come from the land of ice and snow. What's going on with those guys?
We are fascinated by them.
We are fascinated by them. So,
I mean, this Viking Age was historically brief, but very impactful.
Very impactful.
But yes. I don't know if they're as impactful as this delicious. How about talking about history? What about the history of this beer?
The history of this beer. So this is supposed to be a recreation of a pre-Prohibition beer. This is a beer that was popular in the D.C. area from Christian Heinrich Brewing.
Right.
And it was recreated by Right Proper. And so anyway, it's supposed to be, this is what beer tasted like before Prohibition. So that's what we got now. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's 4.7 as far as I can read the can. Obviously, at the time, everything was about the pills. Mm-hmm. So
pretty much tastes like beer. It's not bad. It has a slight funky flavor to it. Yeah, I'm not exactly sure what that is.
Like Led Zeppelin.
It's it's like a crab drinking beer.
It is. Yeah. It is. I mean, it's not
crab eating. I don't drink crabs, Steve.
Not usually, no. Yeah. So it's interesting. It's I don't know. It's kind of a beer.
It's a beer.
It's a beer.
Yeah. That's probably very well said.
If you were out at the ballpark and you ordered a beer, then they gave you this,
you'd be like, well, that's
a beer.
That's what I asked for.
That's right. Okay.
I would drink it if somebody gave it to me.
Yeah.
and say
thank you. Yeah, that's right. All right. So Vikings, what are we doing here?
Yeah. So there's all. I mean, from the horned opera singer to the Minnesota football team.
Yes.
Vikings are all around us, and you wonder, well,
why?
Why are they so impactful? I guess they've been around forever.
They made an impression.
But really, this, what we call the Viking Age, is a tiny little window.
Relatively small.
But yes, they did make quite an impression, and we'll talk about what's going on there.
So what's going on?
So the Vikings come from up north, Norway, Sweden, Denmark, that kind of area. And generally speaking, the people that we think of as Vikings are the people who left those areas.
Yes, they were just ordinary Scandinavians, blacksmithing and farming and trading and doing what they do.
Yeah.
So let's talk about this. Until something
kind of pushed them out.
Something pushed them out, attracted them out. What are the conditions of Scandinavia? And so give me some years here.
The big beginning of the Viking Age is the Lindisfarne raid, 793. But they actually were doing raids before then. But the Lindisfarne was a big one for reasons that we'll get into.
Just for ease of understanding, let's just call it Lindisfarne, and let's call it
793.
793.
And Lindisfarne raid was where?
So it was a little island off the north of England.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Right now would be like the England-Scottish border.
Yeah, that kind of area. And it was a monastery. So it wasn't well protected, and it was a total shock because everybody thought, you don't attack monks,
So there's lots of fighting going on.
Yeah.
But no matter who you are in Christian Europe, nobody's attacking a monastery.
Right.
So who are these people?
Yeah. What do you think you're doing? So why did they do this kind of stuff? So there's a couple of different reasons. One is there was just overpopulation and land security. Apparently the oldest son would get the title to the land, and the younger kids had to kind of go out and make room for themselves. So when you're running out of room, it's like, well, we got these longboats, and there's land out that way.
And from Denmark to Scotland ain't that far.
Well, not when apparently.
It was far for other people, but
not with these boats.
Seafaring people.
So this was a big innovation, was the longboat, which was able to, go long distances at sea, and you could just pull right up onto the shore, which made it really effective for raids.
And it was probably the best boat in the world at the time, right?
That's right.
Well, the other thing was they there's all these rocky shores and everything.
Yeah.
They found where a river came in.
Yeah.
And then it was such a shallow draw.
Yeah.
That you just go right up the river.
Just go right up the river, pull right into the neighborhood, and off you jump, and you're
pillaging away.
You're pillaging away. That's right. So there was trade and exploration. Because they had these ships that could travel long distances over water, they were able to trade long distances. The Vikings went all over the place. They went down into the Mediterranean. They went all the way into Russia. They went into the Middle East. They just went every place. And we'll get to some aspects of that in a little bit. There was a lot of opportunity. There was advancements in shipbuilding, and there was the overpopulation, and there was the idea of I got to make a name for myself. But also there was just this attitude that raiding was like a legitimate form of.
So while Europe is Christian, these guys are not.
Yes.
And on the flip side, so that's the conditions in Scandinavia. The conditions in Europe are very decentralized.
Yeah.
There are not large, there's not nations, powerful kings. It was even pre-feudal. It's just people just living their lives and doing their thing. I think the feudal system really comes from the Vikings.
The feudal system, you think?
I think my understanding is that people realized, all right, we need. There's no government. Everybody's just doing their thing, and then in order to defend yourself, you have to hire armed security.
Yeah.
And then the armed security becomes the government. Then they build a castle with walls to protect the local populace, and then the guy who sits on top is in charge of the whole region. But before that, it was just ripe for the picking. It was fairly prosperous and very undefended.
Well, I read. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, and nobody thought that these guys were just going to raid them for no reason at all.
Well, they did. I mean, there was other stuff going on. They had to fight back the Muslims in Spain and France, right? Yeah. And then there was, the Huns coming over. They had to fight back the Huns. That was a little later. But I mean, there was constant battle going on. But the Vikings represented a different kind of a threat. They were bigger. Apparently, the Vikings were taller than the average European. They had these good ships. They were vicious, and they were very good at what they did. And apparently, they just went in and slaughtered people. And I read this one story about this priest writing to Rome, saying, "Look, we're looking at the complete destruction of the Christian people. There's just but when you go out, there's just dead bodies everywhere."
Wow.
Because the Vikings are just going around slaughtering people. And there's a huge cultural contrast in that the Vikings thought that raiding was fine. They thought that gaining wealth, honor, and social status through raiding was a legitimate pursuit.
Right.
That's just not consistent with a Christian ethos.
Yes, and that their view of heaven was dying in battle.
Right. Yeah.
And so, that's just what you do.
Yeah.
You, as opposed to a Christian worldview.
Yeah, exactly. So from a Christian worldview, being a martyr, dying, being slaughtered is actually not such a bad thing. From a Viking world perspective, that's a scandalous, shameful thing, is to be killed like that. No, you should fight. So there was this huge, the Christian emphasis on forgiveness and mercy, and the Viking pagan emphasis on honor and, retribution and vengeance and that sort of thing. So there was this huge problem. Obviously, the Vikings were polytheists. They had multiple gods, Thor and Odin and Freya and Frigga and all this stuff. So they didn't have any sacred scripture. They didn't have any. Everything was oral tradition. It was just a radically different conception of life. But then the big thing, as I mentioned before, was when they raided the monastery at Lindisfarne. And there had been some raids in England before then, but at this point they came in and they attacked a monastery. They killed a bunch of people. They took some slaves, by the way, people, there was slavery before.
They were big slave traders.
They were big slavers, and we did an episode on that a little while ago. So, and this shocked the people of England because you don't go around killing monks, and that was that's sort of the beginning of the Viking Age. So you can kind of put boundaries on the Viking Age between Lindisfarne and the Battle of Hastings.
Yes.
793 Lindisfarne, 1066 Battle of Hastings. That's kind of the peak Viking Age.
That right. So right. So when you're watching your Viking shows,
yeah, that's the time.
That's the time. Like if you had in your mind 900, just to keep things simple.
Right.
Like so that you know what's before and what's after.
Right.
900's a good number. But we're talking about generations and generations.
Yes, and there was battles back and forth. You had Alfred in England trying to fight against the Danes, and then you had this constant battle back and forth over who was going to control England, and you had the Dane law in effect in different places, and you had Christianity in effect in other places, and it was just a constant battle back and forth. And there have been some very interesting television shows that discuss that time frame.
And the Vikings were extremely successful with just beating the crap out of everybody.
Yes, they were
murdering
effective.
everybody.
So they spent go ahead.
And that is really the reason why their influence expanded very rapidly, if you talk historical terms.
Yeah. So
what they did, I would say if you could divide it into the Viking Age up, you'd had the raiding age. Mm-hmm. And then you had the colonization age.
Yes, exactly.
So there's a while where they would just go to England, steal stuff, and come back. And then, so then the Scandinavians, like you said, were from Denmark and
Norway and Scandinavia, right? Yeah.
Norway and Sweden. And so depending on where you were, you're going either west to the British Isles, or you're going down the Volga River into Russia. Like the Swedes are going down the Volga River, and they're doing their raiding, and then they just start settling.
Yeah.
So then they actually become the foundation of the Kiev Rus people, who will become the Russians.
Right.
So the influence is crazy.
Yeah.
So the transition from raiding to settlement.
You're right.
I mean, is that sort of a natural transition? Why?
I would think so.
But would this? So let's just say you go in after you've raided some place, or actually your ancestors have raided this place, and then you go in. Are you going in, killing everybody and taking over the town, or going? There's room for more people here. I mean, we're just going to move in. You guys are here, and these. There's a million acres over here. We're just going to go over there. Is that cool? There,
well, I think that's. I mean, that ties into the whole overpopulation problem and the problem with land. They didn't. They were running out of land, so they would go out on raids, and then they'd say, "Hey, why don't we just go take that land?"
Yeah, right. That's what I'm saying, though. But is there extra land where they just move into, or are they slaughtering people and then moving into their houses and their farms?
Well, I mean, we bit of both.
Probably a lot of both. But now, you said that they went east down the Volga into Russia, and they went south into Europe. They went west into England, and they went to Iceland and Greenland. But did they go any farther than that?
Well, once you get to Greenland, I mean, where else is there to go westwardly?
I don't know. What is west of Greenland?
Nova Scotia.
Well, I tell you what, we have archaeological evidence of a Viking settlement in Newfoundland.
Okay, all right.
Which is in Canada and in North America.
But you know what I heard?
Gosh, those boats are cool, but they look like they hold like 20 people. They don't really look like. I guess are you skirting the coast? How far, once you get to Greenland, if you're skirting the coast the whole way, as opposed to, sailing from Spain like Columbus. Yeah. If you're going to Iceland and Greenland, how far?
You still have to go across open water for pretty long distances.
That's what I'm saying.
I heard that the Vikings did go to Canada, but the taxes were so high that they said never mind, and they went back.
Well, actually, they raped and pillaged all they could, and they got to Minnesota. So the thing is, the archaeological evidence is
Okay.
clear that there was a Viking settlement in 1000 A.D. in Newfoundland at a place called Meadows.
Okay,
Yes,
thank
it
you.
is.
Don't ask me to say that again. And what the archaeological evidence is pretty cool because what they found 800 archaeological objects, which is, I mean,
It's
these
pretty solid.
objects are over 1,000 years old.
And these are clearly not Native American or Native Canadian or whatever they're
That's
called.
right. These are definitely they're definitely Viking, but they also found, which I think is the most compelling evidence that they went further west, is they found objects that kind of suggest that their trading aspects, their trade routes were far ranging.
I think they
So
found this.
Kilroy.
Right.
I'm sorry. Keep going.
So so if they went any further, and there's no evidence, there's no archaeological evidence, I'll put it that way, that they went any further.
Mm-hmm.
But the only thing that really points to probably that they did is that in this thing they found objects from sort of further west than they were.
So there might have
the
been trade.
trading
Yeah.
route, the trade routes were there. So they were
Actually,
probably
I think I mentioned before this book 1491 that talks about what America was like before Columbus landed,
Mhm.
and it's actually astonishing how far the Indians traded.
yeah.
They traded long distances. So it's possible that even if they were contained to Newfoundland, they might have been trading with people who had been coming from long distances.
Right. I mean, it makes perfect sense that they sort of hooked into a long-ranging trade.
You mean so if they found Viking objects further inland, doesn't mean that the Vikings went further inland.
Exactly.
It just could have been
Or
Indians
vice versa.
Or vice versa, exactly.
Or vice versa.
So if the
Right.
Viking objects showed up in the Great Lakes, or Great Lakes objects showed up in the Viking settlement, it could just mean that they were trading with Indians. Yeah.
Right, but it also means that there was awareness
Yeah.
of the Vikings in Newfoundland, that there was a large population, there was a large society, community, and land.
Well, let's
out
get back
there
to
west.
that. Let's get back to
And then we
Pigweed's
can talk
question
about
about the
the
boats.
science.
Like, how many boats does it take to get a decent population to get all the way over there?
I
in
just
Newfoundland?
don't see. I mean, any the movies that I've seen that are supposedly good representations, looks like there's like 30 guys, 50 guys.
Right. I mean, if you the thing is also in Newfoundland they found like evidence that there were women there.
Okay.
Right. Well, they found objects that would have been associated with women.
Mhm.
So they think
Telephones
that
and things.
well, knitting needles and things like that. So what so the idea that this was they say that the occupation of this archaeological site
Mhm.
was between 20 and 100 years. So
Okay.
it's not much.
Not a lot. Yeah.
Not a lot.
Now, how large do they think it was? How many people?
They don't really know, but they could say anything from like 120
But so what you're saying is
640.
they didn't show up and scoop up some fish and say we did it.
Right,
They
and
actually
go back.
there was a settlement.
There definitely was a settlement, and the idea of going back was probably impossible. So that was the other thing. Is it was like, well, we made it here.
Well, I guess we're here until we're
Well,
not.
actually, that's an interesting question because sometimes when people go long distance on a boat and then they like take the boat apart to build houses or something like that, but also I don't know what the prevailing winds and currents are like. It might be easier to sail
That's
one
what it is.
direction than another.
Right.
Because I mean, these boats, they did have sails. They weren't impressive. They were mostly rowing.
Yes.
But because the idea was to go up these streams and stuff. They weren't deep keeled boats.
No, they didn't have keels, so they couldn't go against the wind.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So yeah, maybe it's a one-way kind of a trip, and everybody, Vikings, they're like,
that's it. It's a one-way trip.
Well, they're on board for that. So if you think about the Viking stock of people who you could say this about the Americans, about America.
Mm-hmm.
The Viking stock who would choose to do that,
Yeah.
as opposed to the farmer guys who are going, I'm not doing that.
Yeah.
Or
The guy who catches a cold all the time isn't going to go. The guy who's like really cold on the boat, he's not going to go.
I ain't going.
No,
Yeah.
it's a special breed.
It's a special breed.
So these are the people that populated America, really, right? So the Polish guy on some farm going, this is good enough.
Mm-hmm.
And another guy going, you know what? You only live once, and I got $5 in my pocket. I'm going to take my chances, live or die trying,
Mm-hmm.
and that is the stock of people that populated America.
Yeah.
And so I heard this thing that in a way the peacefulness, the sort of the pacifist nature of Scandinavia is because all the violent crows got left. They all got out and they founded Russia.
Right.
So
that's
I mean,
funny.
there's probably something to that.
Might be.
Right.
Yeah.
But I like the idea of the.
It's too bad they didn't
it's a
stay.
self-selected bunch
Yeah.
who are going to go Vikinging. Like I said, it's a verb, not really a people. To Viking is to go out and rape and pillage and be that kind of
So
guy.
one question I've always had about this thing about the Vikings being the first to come to America is why didn't they bring smallpox and chickenpox and all the other diseases with them that the Europeans did when they came?
Because
Wow, that's interesting.
Right, because I think at the end of the day is when they settled Meadows in Newfoundland.
You said you were going to say that.
I know. Sorry, I apologize.
No, but I enjoyed it. Thank you.
It was uninhabited. It was
see.
like too damn cold.
So-
Why?
So-
would
And
you
they're
do
like,
that?
right, and they're going. It's too cold for the natives,
Right.
But the Scandinavians are going. Not that bad. I mean, 20s.
It's good enough for me. Right.
I got my loincloth and my legs wrapped in bear skin or whatever. I mean, can we talk about the cold? What
So
I can't. I'm freezing right now.
There's evidence that it was inhabited earlier, but when they showed up around 1000 AD,
Well, we're also talking about the medieval warm period.
Right.
Well,
Yeah,
medieval
warm
warm
is-
period.
They
So,
went
Shit,
so-
you still didn't have Gore-Tex and wool socks.
so it was a warmer period
Warmer.
at that
When
point.
it's
But
still
also,
cold.
but also, I have a friend who was living in Alaska for a while, and he came back and was at my parents' house, and it was winter time, and the heat was on, but it was 70 degrees or something like that in the basement. He couldn't take it. He would have to go outside and stand out in the cold for 5 or 10 minutes to cool off.
So say if being raised like that is you
He wasn't
you
even
didn't have
raised
to
like
acclimate. No, but I'm saying
Yeah.
So that's from a guy from here.
Yeah, who went
Imagine-
there. Imagine if you were raised.
Yes.
So like an
Mongols
Eskimo
or
or something.
yeah,
They don't get cold the way we do. I mean, they get cold, of course, but they could stand the cold way better than we could. And I run into this.
Unbelievable. I mean, obviously.
I run
But
into this
still
with people
it's-
who live in Florida, and so I grew up swimming, and it was normal for us to swim in 70-degree water, right? And people in Florida, they won't get into a pool unless it's at least 80 degrees.
Yeah.
Because it's just too cold. So
So
obviously,
tourists go down there and swim in the ocean during wintertime. Floridians are.
like, what are you doing? It's cold in that water. Yeah.
I was gonna, back in my day when I was living in Idaho, and as a first grader, my mother would put my coat on me, put the hat on, put the gloves on, and it was like 20 degrees minus zero out there, and make me walk to.
Time to go to the bus stop.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I didn't have a bus stop. I had to walk.
All the way to
We had
Skip.
buses in Idaho. Come on. So we would walk there, but she didn't think anything. She wasn't like, "Oh my God, my son might freeze to death."
Yeah.
Or anything.
Yeah. Okay.
All right, hold on. I was watching a program. It was like the channel was borderline Ancient Aliens, but it was about the Kensington Stone found in Minnesota that a farmer pulled down a tree, right, to clearing land. He finds this stone with a bunch of
Runes on it.
runes. He didn't even know what they were. He takes it to somebody. It's actually these runes, and it's actually dated 13 something. And
somebody dated it.
yes, like right. Like so, it was like a land claim.
Right.
Like we Hivgar of Minnesota claim this land to be ours. It's just a legal deed dated 1345 or something. And he takes it to the local university or something. It's like, I found this thing there. And so it became a kind of a big deal.
Yeah, and there was a lot of ideas. Like, there was a scholarly debate. Of course, there's scholarly debate with everything. And, there was the ones that believed it and the ones that didn't believe it. But at the end of the day, it was found to be a hoax.
Son of a gun. So you're right. So you bring.
I was just wondering if Vikings would be using Christian dates.
Well, that's the thing.
I think maybe that might have been the kicker. Yeah.
It was the Swedish linguist
Yeah.
who said, "Oh, this language wasn't even around during that date, so this has to be."
They would know the difference between.
This was like the 18th century.
I don't know. I kind of liked it anyway. But all right, so that's a hoax. But you feel really good about Leif Erikson. Is that true? And the don't say it again.
Well, it's
Newfoundland colony.
It's a World Heritage Site, so yes,
Okay.
I mean it is something
All
where they're saying
Sorry.
that this is really important to world history.
Yes, the Spaniards and the Italians are just going to have to suck it up on this one.
Well, science, has that falsibility, and nobody has been able to falsify the archaeological evidence.
Well, so I don't agree that the Spanish and the Portuguese and everybody have to give up their "We discovered America" card because, let's say the Vikings came first.
Yeah.
Apparently they did.
Yeah.
Right.
Supposedly there's evidence that maybe the Chinese landed in California before Columbus came to.
I reject that.
But they didn't establish any long-term settlement.
Sure.
All right.
So there's a difference.
Fair enough.
Okay.
Fair enough.
It's fair enough, but then you can go ahead and let me see if I can find my notes here. Yes, in 1940 to 1956, writer T. Sherwin published a series of books entitled "The Viking and the Red Man,"
Okay.
in which he argued that there were over 2,500 comparisons between the Algonquin or the Lenape language and Old Norse. So he was trying to make a linguistic argument that the Old Norse...
That they were there long enough to affect
the Algonquin language.
Well, what do you know?
Well,
Anyway, nobody else believes it except for Mr. Sherwin. But
all right, well, Mr. Sherwin, I love your effort.
Yeah.
I love your effort. All right, can I ask you, gentlemen, to name your favorite date of British history? Like, what is the one date that you like? I know this one thing about an event that happened in England. What date might that be?
it would be 1066.
I mean, any American, it would almost, to a person, can you name one other definitive date of a definitive event that happened in England? Gosh, for the length of time that England has been doing interesting and fun things, you would have some more dates.
Well, I mean, you could come up with dates about the Restoration, the
But what are they?
War. I don't know.
That's what I'm saying. I'm just like off the top of your head. What is your one date?
The one date is 1066.
Your one date is 1066. May I talk about 1066?
Okay. Yes.
Because it does relate to our topic here.
Okay, yes.
So 1066 is that date that William of Normandy, who doesn't sound very Viking related.
But he's just a Viking living in France.
So what happened was, while the Vikings are raiding the crap out of France, they say, look, Rollo, how about if you just take this piece of land closest to, as we know, Normandy. The only reason we know Normandy is what? The D-Day, right?
Yeah.
Because it's very close to England. You take this piece of land and stop coming into Paris and coming down the Seine and raping and pillaging. Just keep this land, and you'll be a buffer to other, to other Vikings that are coming down. Right. So they take that, and about 5 generations later, these Vikings are Frenchified.
Yeah.
They're French-speaking in their own Norman French or whatever, and they have a claim. And then, so you get to William, who's like 5 generations away from Rollo, and he says, because Edward the Confessor
Yeah.
had lived in France.
Well, there was a lot. There was a time where England, Normandy, and then the Scandinavian areas were very closely tied together, and there was
exactly.
a lot of commerce among the nobility. They were marrying back and forth.
Right, and so in the sense that he's called William the Conqueror, sounds like he's an outsider coming in with no claim at all, just conquering people.
He had a claim, whether it was a good one or not.
Well, whether it's a good one or not, I'm sure in his mind, though, what I'm saying is he and his people think that he has a legitimate claim. Edward the Confessor dies with no children. Harold Godwinson is the next guy in line.
Right.
And he says, but, things are unstable.
Yeah.
So he hears about, I don't know how these people, it sounds like they're communicating, but
Morse code,
what's communication like at this time? It's like
Yeah.
3 months for a letter to get from some place to another place. I don't know how this works, but they so these Frenchified Vikings feel like they have a claim. They go across to England and they beat Harold Godwinson, who had already. He knew Harold. He knew.
Well, there was a battle before the Battle of Hastings. Harold Hardrada and those guys.
He knew that William the Conqueror was coming.
Mm-hmm.
Then he had to turn around, go back, defeat Harold Hardrada from Norway.
Mm-hmm.
Now you have half an army or whatever.
Yeah.
Have to speed march. And put up, and almost won this battle at Hastings. Probably at full strength without the previous battle. Might have done it and we would never have had the influence.
Yeah.
So, yes, so the Normans come in, and how it is that this band of Normans can subdue the entire nation, I guess has to do with the fact that there was no king holding the country together.
Well, also, you couldn't move armies around very quickly. And so once you take control of major centers of power, and then that's it. I mean, what do you? The farmers aren't going to come fight you.
But at some point, if it was a more unified country, then you could have brought your people together. But they didn't. Anyway, the Normans, took over England.
Yeah.
They killed all of the aristocracy.
Yeah.
Built massive network of castles, and
that was what era?
So this is right. So it's 1066.
Right.
So we're talking about the first of the tens, and
all the way
we have 300 years of French-speaking aristocracy. So even Richard the Lionheart is French-speaking.
Yeah.
And it's for 300 years before you have an English king that speaks English as his first language, and that the language of the court is English. But of course, at this point, English doesn't look like it did during Beowulf's time or pre-Norman time.
Yeah.
But I just.
But the good thing about it, though, is when you think about the English, because Americans have somewhat of an affinity with England, even though we kicked their butts and rebelled against them, but we still have somewhat of an affinity.
I still think of them as first cousins.
Exactly. Yeah. So we have an affinity with them, but we can take solace in the fact that these weren't like Sissified French; these were like Viking French. So they weren't
right. So the Danes, the Germanic tribes had already, or the Vikings the Danish had already conquered the northeast portion of England.
Mm-hmm.
So in a way, we think of the English and the French fighting forever, because they did. There was a war called the 100 Years' War. That's just one of the wars, and it lasted 100 years. So that's pretty significant. But in this case, it was almost like Frankified Vikings against Anglified Vikings.
to some extent.
To some extent, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, England was successively conquered by multiple. You have the people
or colonized,
who were there, or colonized. Yeah. So you had people there, then the Romans come in, and then you have the Angles and the Saxons and the Jutes. And you have all these different groups of people coming in and colonizing, taking over parts of England.
Yes.
And that was
but so when you hear Normans because you associate it with Normandy, which is in France, they're of Scandinavian stock.
Yeah.
And they, ended up.
And that is, thankfully, the end of the Viking Age.
Right.
And
why did the Viking Age sort of peter out?
Oh, that's a good question. Why did they stop the raiding after that? Maybe because they had
Because they were
had their
settling?
people there, and
They were assimilating?
a little bit. No, because you had this sort of decentralized feudal system before you got to a larger nation state.
Right.
And then once you got, once William the Conqueror, once had established the whole country, nobody's coming in without
the
proper
country,
defense.
Right.
And so
Defending you, right.
yes. And so after 1000, you had stronger nations who could fend off.
Yeah.
So a strong central government.
Yeah.
Well,
Exactly.
whatever that means, right? So it's the feudal states come together to create their connection with each other, to create a bigger thing, to create the state that allows.
And probably
them-
also just some organizational things, like being
Yes.
able because you imagine you're in England and you've got an army, and you're like, okay, somebody's going to attack, but where are they going to land?
Right.
And
So
how am I going to know that?
Right. So England is like a frontier.
Yeah.
All the way up until
So
past
some
1066,
army
right?
lands in some place in northern England. How do you know that they're there?
I don't know, because I look back with modern eyes about how this communication works, and then you're like somebody in Mexico requests help from the King of Spain.
It takes 2 months.
It's too much just to get the word there, and then you figure out what to do, and then you respond 2 months later. But historically, when you're looking back at things, you're just going, okay, and then they said, hey, and then we went, we did this.
Yeah, they didn't.
It's amazing.
They didn't have telephones, so it was very interesting. So that's the Vikings.
So
And
the
why?
sophistication and creation of governments, or the organization of hierarchy to allow larger and larger groups to form and create an organization to protect themselves and do other things.
Yeah. And that's
Created
part
the buffer that.
and that's part of kind of the evolution
And
of
at that
man
point-
in general, is
Yes.
going from these small groups of 20 and 30 and 40, to larger and larger and larger collections of people until you have nations.
Right, and at this point, they were just sort of they weren't raiding in, or they had already just incorporated themselves into Ukraine, Sicily,
Right.
Newfoundland.
So why do we have so many Viking TV shows nowadays?
Doesn't it seem, is the
Oh, I got
is
two
the-
reasons.
Is the same
Okay.
common or
It does. There's a lot of them. Yeah. What are your reasons?
All right, so the first one is the
badassery?
right. Well, let me say the idea of the postmodern idea that power is the fundamental assumption of
that's a good
society
one.
and culture
That's a
and
good
man,
one.
and
I like
that
it.
we are not holding ourselves up to a higher morality than whoever is in power. That's the closest or highest we can go.
So in other
So
words, just kind of a not worship, but a respect for the raw exercise of power.
or a belief that that's all there is.
Okay.
You know,
That's
it's
a good one.
almost like so. I mean, this is going really from Peterson's idea that this is that that the fundamental. I mean, it's that's what postmodernism said is Foucault said that power is it.
Is it?
That's all there is. And before Foucault,
And they were powerful.
There was morality. There was ethical things. So that's the first one.
Right.
And then the second one is, I think, the idea that masculinity has been sort of questioned. To put it politely, has been questioned for the last several decades of what is masculine, and nobody really knows what it is except for Robert Bly. He knows what it is.
But I would say, as we feminize the culture, we try to dismiss and push down the idea of masculinity. But actually, as our passion for Viking culture indicates, we actually admire that and strive for it, even as the feminization encourage us to say toxic masculinity, boo, 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 and then it's what, Vikings? Okay, I'm on, honey. You in? Bring popcorn.
Yeah, right. Yeah. But and I mean, this isn't saying that the rise of femininity is a bad thing. It's like I'll say the absurd criticism of masculinity is the bad aspect.
And this is very.
But the rise of woman being an individual human being.
Well, good for her, yes. But I think this is. I had not considered that, Longinus, that our embrace or interest in Viking culture is a bit of a re-embrace of the masculine code.
So I've got two other ones.
Oh, well,
all right.
Okay. So one is Western self-hatred. That the West, especially in Europe, but to some extent in America, we have this self-loathing, and the idea of the Vikings beating the Christian Western culture is appealing to some people, and that kind of ties in with kind of the modern revival of an interest in paganism.
See, I could take it both ways of what you just said.
Right.
That it could be pro-Western and anti-Western. Pro-Western in a sense that it is bringing back this Western culture of masculinity and everything, and anti-Western that is beating the shit out of Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
So that's fascinating.
Yeah.
What else you got?
That's it. Those are the two I got. Yeah, the
right.
revival of paganism and Western self-hatred, and power is the big principle, and masculinity. Those are all interesting reasons.
But I would say that popular culture's interest in pagan badassery and macho-ness is a good sign.
It's certainly better than
even if it's even if it challenges Christianity, at least it promotes masculinity.
Yeah, that's right. And one of the things.
But does it really promote the positive aspects of masculinity? That's the question.
Right. Yes.
Well,
okay,
I don't know. I don't know. I haven't watched the Viking series or to know enough about how that works. But
But at
least you know what.
At least we have some warriors.
Yes, women pretend to like soy boys, but really, in the end,
they don't.
They want badasses. Yeah. They create the men that they don't like.
So here's one last thing. If the Viking Age interests you, read a book called The Wolf Age.
Really?
Which covers. Yeah, it's a very interesting book.
Is it WULF?
Like a badass?
No, wolf like the critter.
All right, gentlemen.
All right.
Fight on.
Cheers. Thanks so much for listening to Beer and Conversation with Pigweed and Crowhill. Remember to visit us at pigweedandcrowhill.com or send us an email at pigweedshow@gmail.com.